Some families fracture slowly, but mine shattered in one night when my parents bolted the door and tossed my bag on the porch like trash. They claimed they had no choice. They never guessed my estranged brother had been watching them for 7 years. His secret move didn't just save me, it ripped their perfect narrative apart. I wasn't kicked out that night because I was sick. I was exiled because I had become living proof of their crimes. My name is Ivy Simmons, and up until 45 minutes ago, I thought the worst sound in the world was the beep of a heart monitor flatlining. I was wrong. The worst sound in the world is the heavy, mechanical clunk of a deadbolt sliding home on the door of the only house you have ever known, locking you out into a thunderstorm. I stood on the concrete porch, the rain already soaking through my thin cotton sweater, plastering my hair to my forehead. My entire body was trembling, but not just from the cold. It was the tremors again, the familiar violent shaking in my hands and knees that the doctors called a symptom and my parents called an inconvenience. At my feet lay a black duffel bag and 2 cardboard boxes, rapidly turning into soggy pulp. The front door opened again, but only a few inches. The security chain was still on, creating a narrow slice of warm yellow light that cut across the darkness. My father's face appeared in the gap. He didn't look angry. That would have been easier to process. Anger implies passion, a loss of control. He looked bored. He looked like a middle manager firing an employee he had never really liked. "You can't live here anymore, Ivy," he said. His voice was steady, practiced. "This house isn't a hospital." Behind him, somewhere in the hallway, I saw my mother. She was standing near the coat rack, her back half turned to me. She was clutching her cell phone in both hands, her knuckles white, staring at the screen as if waiting for a command. She didn't look up. She didn't look at me at all. "Dad, please," I choked out. The cold was making my joints seize up. "I have the specialist appointment on Tuesday. My meds are in the bathroom cabinet. I don't have anywhere to go." "You should have thought about that before you decided to stop getting better," he said. It was such an absurd statement that I almost laughed, but the sound died in my throat. "I didn't decide anything. I'm sick. You know I'm sick." "You're a danger to yourself," he recited. It sounded scripted. It sounded like a line from a bad movie that he had memorized 10 minutes ago. "We have tried everything, Ivy. We have exhausted our resources. We can't enable this behavior any longer." "Behavior?" I screamed, the desperation finally clawing its way out of my chest. "It's a neurological disorder. It's not a bad attitude." The porch light next door flicked on. Mrs. Higgins, the neighborhood gossip who spent her retirement watching the street through her blinds, had opened her window. I saw the silhouette of her head bobbing. My father saw her too, immediately. His posture changed. He straightened up, raising his voice just enough so it would carry over the sound of the rain and into Mrs. Higgins's living room. "We love you, Ivy," he shouted, his tone shifting into a performance of heartbroken paternal concern. "But we can't force you to take your medication. If you are going to be unstable and refuse treatment, we have to protect ourselves." "What are you talking about?" I cried, stepping closer to the crack in the door. "I took my meds this morning. You watch me take them. Please, just go get help," he said, loud and sad. For the audience. Then he looked me dead in the eye, the mask dropping for a split second to reveal a cold, hollow glare. "Goodbye, Ivy." The door slammed shut. The deadbolt clicked again. Then the porch light went out, plunging me into total darkness. I stood there for a minute, banging my fist against the wood until my knuckles bruised. But the silence from inside was absolute. The rain was coming down harder now, freezing rain that felt like needles against my skin. My legs were beginning to give out. The fatigue, my constant companion since I was 14, was washing over me like a tidal wave. I couldn't stay here. If I collapsed on the porch, they would probably call the police and tell them I was trespassing. I grabbed the handle of the duffel bag. It was heavy, heavier than it should have been for a few clothes and toiletries. I dragged it down the driveway, the wheels skidding on the wet asphalt. Every step sent a jolt of pain up my spine. I made it to the bus stop at the end of the block. It was just a small plexiglass shelter, covered in graffiti, but it offered a little protection from the wind. I collapsed onto the metal bench, my chest heaving. I was 19 years old, and I was homeless. The reality of it sat in my stomach like a stone. I pulled the duffel bag onto my lap, needing to see what they had actually packed. Had they given me my warm coat, my wallet, my prescription refills? I unzipped the main compartment. It was a mess. Clothes were shoved in haphazardly. My old high school hoodie, a pair of jeans, some socks, but right on top, resting on a tangle of shirts, was a white envelope. It was dry. It hadn't been exposed to the rain. I frowned. I hadn't packed this. I hadn't packed any of this. My father had thrown the bag out before I even got to the door. I picked up the envelope. It was thick, high-quality paper. There was no name on the outside. My hands were shaking so badly I ripped the corner, tearing it open. I reached inside and pulled out a single index card. There were only 6 words written on it in black ink. Don't trust anyone, including me. I stopped breathing. The world around me, the rain, the traffic noise, the cold, faded into a dull hum. I knew that handwriting, the sharp, jagged slant of the T, the way they looped at the bottom like a coiled snake. It was Miles, my brother, Miles, who had stormed out of the house 7 years ago after a fight that ended with shattered glass and a hole in the drywall. Miles, who had never called, never written, never looked back. My parents told me he was dead to us. They told me he was a drug addict, a criminal, a failure, but this was his handwriting. Fresh ink. I looked around wildly. The street was empty, slick with rain and reflected neon from the convenience store sign down the road. How did this get in my bag? Miles hadn't been in that house in 7 years. My parents hated him. There was no way they would deliver a message from him. Unless he had been there, or unless someone inside the house was working with him. Don't trust anyone, I whispered, the vapor of my breath clouding the air. Suddenly, the hair on the back of my neck stood up. A feeling of being watched, primal and immediate, washed over me, across the street. About 30 yards down, a dark sedan was parked under the shadow of an oak tree. The engine was running. I could see the exhaust puffing out into the cold air. The headlights were off. I stared at it. The driver's side window began to roll down, slow and smooth. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't listen. I just sat there, clutching the note, frozen. A figure was sitting in the driver's seat. It was too dark to see a face, and they were wearing a black hoodie pulled up and a surgical mask covering the lower half of their face. They didn't wave. They didn't call out. Instead, the person raised a hand. They were holding a smartphone, the screen glowing faintly in the dark cab. They held it up, lens pointing directly at me. They were filming me. They weren't helping. They weren't checking if I was okay. They were documenting this moment, like I was a package that had been delivered to the curb. And they were the courier taking a proof of delivery photo. For 10 seconds, we just stared at each other. Me, shivering and broken on the bench, and the stranger in the car recording my misery. Then, without a word, the window rolled up. The car shifted into gear and pulled away from the curb, disappearing into the rainy night, leaving me alone with 6 words that terrified me more than the storm. The bus smelled like wet wool and diesel, a combination that usually made my stomach turn. But tonight, I was too numb to notice. I sat with my forehead pressed against the cold glass, watching the suburban sprawl of my childhood blur into the darker, grittier texture of the city limits. It is strange how quickly your identity can dissolve. 2 hours ago, I was Ivy Simmons, the sick girl in the blue bedroom. Now, I was just another passenger with a duffel bag, staring at nothing. Before the sickness, I was defined by my potential. I was the girl who raised her hand first in calculus. I was the one tracking to be valedictorian. Then, when I turned 14, the glitch started. It began with a tingling in my fingertips, like I had been sitting on my hands. but it wouldn't go away. Then came the vertigo, the sensation that the floor was tilting 30 degrees to the left. By 15, the tremors were visible. By 16, the exhaustion was so heavy it felt like I was wading through wet concrete just to walk to the bathroom. That was when the narrative shifted. My parents stopped talking about colleges and started talking about management. I closed my eyes and tried to steady my breathing, instinctively reaching for the rhythm Miles had taught me a lifetime ago. I could almost feel his hands on my shoulders, grounding me. He was 6 years older than me, and while other big brothers ignored their siblings, Miles studied me. He studied everything. He had this intense, unsettling way of looking at the world, like he was constantly checking for structural weaknesses. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4. He used to whisper when I had nightmares. He was the only one who didn't look at me with pity or annoyance. But Miles had been erased from our house long before I was. I still remember the night he left. I was 12. There was no buildup, just a sudden explosion of noise from the kitchen. I remembered the sound of a Pyrex dish shattering against the wall, a sharp, violent crash that made me dive under my covers. Then came my father's voice, not the measured, corporate tone he used tonight, but a raw, animal roar. "If you want to destroy this house, then get out. You are done here." The front door had slammed, and the silence that followed was heavy enough to crush a person. The next morning, his room was empty. My parents never spoke his name again. It was as if he had been a clerical error they had finally corrected. After Miles left, the temperature in the house dropped. My parents went from being warm, if somewhat distant, to becoming rigorous case managers. My illness wasn't a tragedy. It was a line item on a ledger. It was an expense to be minimized and a liability to be contained. As the bus hit a pothole, jarring my spine, a memory surfaced that made my skin crawl. It was the clinics. We never went to the big university hospital downtown, the one with the research wing and the specialists. Instead, my father drove us to these nondescript medical centers in strip malls, places with generic names like Premier Care Solutions or Wellness Path. The doctors were never the same twice. I would see a doctor, Evans 1 month, and by the next appointment, he would be gone, replaced by a doctor, Lewis, who barely looked at my chart. The exams were cursory. They checked my reflexes, shone a light in my eyes, and wrote prescriptions. But the paperwork, that was where the ritual was strictest. Every single visit, before we left the reception desk, my father would slide a clipboard in front of me. "Sign the bottom, Ivy," he would say, uncapping a pen. "What is it?" I would ask, trying to read the dense blocks of text through my blurring vision. "Just the confirmation that the doctor explained the risks to you. It is standard procedure for insurance. We can't leave until you sign." He would often rest his hand on the page, covering the paragraphs above the signature line, tapping his finger impatiently on the X. I signed. I always signed. I was 16, 17, 18, tired, and trusting. I signed because I wanted to go home and sleep. I signed because I thought they were saving me. Now, sitting on this bus, the realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. Tonight wasn't an emotional snap. My father hadn't lost his temper because I didn't take a pill. The way the door was bolstered, the speech about me being a danger, the neighbors watching. It was a performance. They hadn't packed my bag in a rage. I looked down at the duffel on my lap. I had unzipped it earlier. My toothbrush was inside a plastic travel case. My shampoo was in a sealed bag to prevent leaking. You do not pack toiletries like that when you are throwing someone out in the heat of the moment. You do that when you have a checklist. This was a scheduled eviction. The bus hissed to a halt at the terminal. I dragged my things off, my body screaming in protest. I had one lifeline left. A girl I used to tutor in English, Sarah, had moved to the city for art school. She was currently doing a semester abroad in Europe and had mentioned months ago that her studio apartment was sitting empty. She had jokingly given me the keypad code, saying, "In case you ever need to escape the suburbs." I prayed the code hadn't changed. It took me another 40 minutes to navigate the subway and walk the 3 blocks to her building. It was a walk-up. The kind of place that smelled of stale curry and damp plaster. When I punched in the numbers, 4, 8, 1, 5, and the lock clicked green, I nearly wept. I stumbled inside, locking the door behind me and sliding down against it until I hit the floor. The room was cold, dusty, and cluttered with canvases, but it was dry. I needed to think. I needed to figure out why Miles had left that note. Don't trust anyone. My phone buzzed in my pocket, making me jump. My heart hammered against my ribs. I pulled it out. It was a text message from a number I didn't recognize. No area code, just a string of digital digits that looked like they had been routed through a server farm. I stared at the screen, the blue light illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. If you are reading this, it means they have finally done the step I was waiting for. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. A second message popped up immediately after. They think you are gone. Stay gone. Do not reply to this number. It was signed with a single letter, M. I let the phone drop to my lap. My brother wasn't just watching, he was waiting. And whatever game my parents thought they had just won, Miles had been playing a different version of it for 7 years. I wasn't just a sick girl anymore. I was a piece on a board I couldn't even see yet. The adrenaline from finding the note had started to fade, replaced by a cold, creeping dread that settled in the pit of my stomach. I was sitting on the floor of Sarah's studio apartment, the only light coming from the street lamps outside filtering through the rain-streaked window. I picked up the envelope again. My fingers traced the inside of the thick paper. There was a lump near the bottom seam that I had missed in my panic at the bus stop. I ripped the envelope open completely. Taped to the inside, right where the glue strip met the paper, was a tiny black square, a micro SD card. A piece of masking tape was folded over it, with 2 words written in that same sharp, jagged handwriting, "Open offline." My heartbeat stuttered. Miles was not just leaving me a goodbye note. He was giving me data, but I could not just stick this into a phone. Offline meant he was worried about digital tracking. He was worried about spyware. I looked around the apartment. Sarah was an art student, but she was a hoarder of vintage technology. I dug through a plastic bin under her bed until I found an old, heavy laptop, the kind that still had a CD drive and weighed 5 pounds. It took 5 minutes to boot up, the fan whirring like a jet engine. Before I did anything else, I physically switched off the Wi-Fi toggle on the side of the chassis. I inserted the card. A folder popped up on the screen titled simply, Home. There were 2 video files. I clicked the first one. The timestamp in the corner read 2 weeks ago, shortly after 2 in the morning. The angle was high and wide, a security camera view of the upstairs hallway in my parents' house. I recognized the carpet. I recognized the door to my room on the left. My parents were standing there. They were not fighting. They were not grieving the daughter they claimed was too sick to manage. They were whispering. But the audio was crystal clear. If she stays until next month, they are going to check again, my father said. He was leaning against the wall, rubbing his temples. He looked annoyed, like he was discussing a tax audit. My mother crossed her arms. She was wearing her nightgown. We can handle the check. As long as the file is closed, it is fine. We just need the signature. It is risky, my father muttered. Keeping her here is riskier, my mother snapped. The new assessment protocols are stricter. If a third party sees her, we lose the leverage. I paused the video. My hand was shaking so hard, I could barely control the trackpad. They closed. Leverage. Who were they? The doctors? The insurance company? And what file were they closing? I had spent 5 years believing my parents were fighting a war against my illness, battling insurance companies to keep me alive. But in this video, they sounded like they were trying to hide me. They sounded like they were trying to bury evidence. I clicked the second video. This one was in daylight. The timestamp was from 3 months ago. The camera was positioned in the foyer. The front door opened, and my father welcomed a man inside. The stranger was tall, wearing a generic gray suit, carrying a leather briefcase. He looked unremarkable, the kind of man you would forget 5 seconds after meeting him. "Mr. Collier," my father said, shaking his hand. Thank you for coming on such short notice. It is not a problem, the man said. His voice was smooth, professional. I have the revised custody addendums here. We just need to make sure the transition looks natural. My breath hitched. Collier. I knew that name. I closed my eyes, digging through the fog of my memory. About 6 months ago, I had walked into the kitchen to get water and saw a stack of mail on the counter. There was an invoice on top, heavy bond paper, gold letterhead. I had only read the header before my mother snatched it away, claiming it was for financial consulting, Collier Associates. But the line item I had seen wasn't for stocks or bonds. It had a medical code next to it. I remembered thinking it was odd that a financial consultant was billing us using the same codes as my neurologist. I ejected the card and shoved it into the coin pocket of my jeans. I needed to verify this. I couldn't just trust a grainy video and a memory from a day I was high on painkillers. I needed paper. It was 7 in the morning now. The rain had stopped, leaving the city gray and washed out. I washed my face in Sarah's tiny sink, trying to scrub away the exhaustion, and headed out. I didn't go back to the suburbs. I went to the urgent care clinic 2 blocks away. It wasn't my usual clinic, but all the medical systems were linked now. If I had a file, it should be accessible anywhere. The waiting room was empty. The receptionist, a young woman with bright pink nails, looked bored. I need a copy of my records, I said, handing over my ID. I am switching providers. She popped her gum and started typing. Name and date of birth? Ivy Simmons, March 12th, 2006, she typed. Then she frowned. She hit the backspace key and typed again. The boredom on her face was replaced by confusion. That is weird, she muttered. What is weird? I asked, gripping the edge of the counter. You are not in the general network, she said, spinning the screen slightly so she could squint at it. It says your file is restricted. Restricted? I have been in and out of clinics for 5 years. I have seen a dozen doctors. Yeah, but it looks like your primary care isn't a hospital, she said, scrolling down. Your records were transferred out of the public health exchange 6 months ago. They are held by a private entity. Who holds them? I demanded. She read the line on the screen. Simmons Family Support Trust. It is listed as a private custodial management system. I felt the blood drain from my face. That is not a hospital. That is my parents' charitable foundation. Well, whoever they are, they have locked your medical history, she said, shrugging. I can't print anything. It says, refer to Guardian for access. Technically, according to this, you do not have an open chart. It says your case is resolved. Resolved. That was the word my mother used. Closed. Thank you, I whispered. I turned and walked toward the automatic doors, my legs feeling like jelly. My parents hadn't just kicked me out. They had erased my medical history. They had moved my entire life into a private shell company where no doctor could double-check their work. If I went to a new doctor now, I would have no history, no proof of my condition, no proof of the medications I had been taking. I would just look like a junkie asking for pills. I pushed through the doors onto the sidewalk. The morning air was cold. I was so lost in my panic that I didn't see the woman coming until she slammed into me. It was a hard, deliberate impact. Her shoulder checked mine, knocking the breath out of me. "Watch it!" I gasped, stumbling back. She didn't apologize. She was wearing a beige trench coat and a scarf that covered most of her face, but her eyes were sharp, intelligent, and locked onto mine. She gripped my forearm, her fingers digging into my skin through my sweater. "Don't go back in there," she hissed. Her voice was low, urgent. "Don't go to any more clinics." "What? Who are you?" I tried to pull away, but her grip was iron. "They get an alert every time someone queries your file," she said, leaning in close, like she was threatening me. "If you keep asking, they will find you before noon. They will say you are making it up. They will say you are having a psychotic break." She let go of my arm as quickly as she had grabbed it. Before I could ask another question, she shoved a crumpled piece of paper into my hand. "Be there," she said, stepping back and blending into the stream of pedestrians walking to work. "Come alone. If you bring anyone, I am gone." She turned the corner and vanished. I stood there on the busy sidewalk, people rushing past me, clutching the scrap of paper. I unfolded it. It was a receipt from a coffee shop, but on the back, written in blue ballpoint pen, were 3 lines. "The laundromat on 5th and Elm, 11:45 tonight. I know about the money." I looked up at the gray sky. My brother had told me not to trust anyone, but he had also told me to open the files. And now, a stranger knew about a money trail I hadn't even discovered yet. The game had started, and I was terrified to realize that I was already several moves behind. The laundromat on 5th and Elm was exactly the kind of place you went to if you wanted to be invisible. It was washed in harsh, flickering fluorescent light that made everyone look like a ghost, and the air was thick with the smell of cheap detergent and dryer sheets. It was open 24 hours a day, and at 1:45 p.m. It was populated by shift workers, exhausted students, and people who, like me, didn't really have anywhere else to go. The noise was constant, a rhythmic, mechanical thrum of tumbling clothes that made it impossible for anyone to eavesdrop unless they were standing right next to you. I pretended to load my few remaining dry clothes into a washer I didn't intend to start. My nerves were frayed wires. Every time the automatic door whooshed open, my stomach clenched. At exactly 11:45, the woman from the street walked in. She had shed the beige trench coat for a nondescript gray hoodie and jeans, carrying a laundry basket full of white linens. She didn't look at me. She walked straight to the folding table nearest the back exit, dumped her basket, and started snapping a sheet. I walked over, my heart hammering against my ribs. "You said you knew about the money," I said, keeping my voice low. She didn't look up. Her hands moved efficiently, folding the sheet corner to corner. "Grab a towel. Fold it. If we just stand here talking, we look suspicious. If we are doing laundry, we are just 2 bored women killing time." I grabbed a frayed white towel from her pile. My hands were trembling, but I forced myself to mimic her movements. "Who are you?" "My name is Harper Lane," she said, her eyes scanning the reflection in the glass of the washing machines opposite us. "Until 2 weeks ago, I was a senior file coordinator for a private health management firm called Exiled Systems. You have never heard of it. That is the point. The receptionist at the clinic mentioned a trust," I said. "Simmons Family Support." Harper let out a dry, humorless laugh. "That is just the front end. That is the shell they put on the bank statements so your parents can sleep at night. Exiled is the engine." She slid a folded sheet across the table and picked up another. "You think you were kicked out last night because your parents finally snapped? Because they couldn't handle the stress of a sick child anymore?" "My father said I was a danger to myself," I replied, the memory of his cold voice still stinging. "Your father is a bad actor reading a good script," Harper said. She reached into the pile of laundry and pulled out a manila envelope hidden between 2 pillowcases. She slid it under the towel I was holding. "Look at the 3rd page." I pulled the document out, keeping it shielded from the view of the attendant in the corner. It was a dense legal form titled Permanent Medical Guardianship and Asset Control Authorization. I skipped to the bottom. There was a signature, Ivy Simmons. It was dated 3 years ago. I would have been 16. "I didn't sign this," I whispered. "I remember being 16. I was lucid. I never signed away my rights." "Look at the date," Harper commanded. "August 14th, I read. "Where were you on August 14th, 3 years ago?" I racked my brain. August. That was the summer my condition had spiked. I was in that clinic in Nevada, the one with the desert view. They had me on a new sedative trial. I slept for 18 hours a day. "Exactly," Harper said. "You were incapacitated. That signature is a forgery. Your mother practiced it for weeks. I saw her do it in the waiting room while your father distracted the notary." I stared at the loop of the Y in my name. It was too perfect, too smooth. "Why?" I asked, looking up at her. Why go through all this just to control my medical decisions? I always did what they asked. It is not about decisions, Ivy. It is about the payout, Harper said, her voice dropping to a whisper that barely cut through the noise of the spin cycle. The Simmons Family Support Fund isn't a charity. It doesn't take donations from neighbors or bake sales. The money comes from a single source, a biochemical research subsidiary that pays grants to families who participate in long-term, off-book observational studies. I felt the room tilt. Studies? You mean I'm a test subject? You are a data point, Harper corrected. A very expensive one. For 5 years, every pill you took, every seizure you had, every time you reported pain. Your parents logged it and sent it to Ethelgard. In exchange, the grant released a monthly stipend, $5,000 a month at first, then $10,000 as your symptoms became more complex. They were getting paid for my pain, I said, the nausea rising in my throat. They were getting paid to keep you sick enough to study, but well enough to stay out of the ER, Harper said brutally. But here's the problem. The study had a cap. It ends when the subject turns 20, or if the data becomes compromised. You are turning 20 soon, and worse. There's an audit coming. The IRS is starting to look at these charitable trusts that only have one beneficiary. So they dumped me, I realized. To cut the tie. They didn't just dump you, they initiated the exit protocol, Harper explained, folding a pillowcase with violent precision. That is why they made a scene. That is why they told the neighbors you were unstable. If you are just a crazy girl who ran away and refused help, the money stops naturally. The audit sees a failed case, not a fraud. They get to keep the house, the cars, and the savings they built off your suffering. You get the street. I am just a file to them, I said, tears pricking my eyes. I am just paperwork they needed to shred. Harper stopped folding. She looked at me, her expression softening for the first time into something like pity, or maybe respect. No, she said, you are not a file. If you were just a file, they would have kept you until the bitter end. You are a leak. You started asking questions about the medication labels 6 months ago. You started remembering things you shouldn't. You became a liability. She leaned in closer across the table. I was the one who processed your discharge yesterday. I saw the notation your father added to the final report. He wrote, "Subject has become non-compliant and hostile. Termination of environment recommended." Termination of environment, I repeated, tasting the corporate sterility of the phrase. It meant kicking your daughter out into the rain. I couldn't watch it happen again, Harper said, her voice shaking slightly. I have processed hundreds of these, but I couldn't do yours. Why me? I asked. Harper hesitated. She looked at the door, then back at me. Because you are not the first Simmons to cross my desk. The air in the laundromat seemed to freeze. What do you mean? I asked. 7 years ago, Harper said slowly, before I was a coordinator, I was just an intern. We had a file come in, a young man. He wasn't a patient, though. He was a whistleblower. He had somehow gotten his hands on the initial contract your parents signed. Miles, I breathed. He tried to report it, Harper said. He called the ethics board. He called the state. But Ethelgard is big. Ivy, they have lawyers who eat ethics boards for breakfast. They buried his complaint. They threatened him with a lawsuit that would have put him in prison for corporate espionage. And then your parents, they did the rest. They told me he ran away, I said. They told me he hated us. He didn't run away, Harper said. He was forced out, just like you. Only he didn't have anyone to warn him. My brother. Miles hadn't abandoned me. He had tried to save me before the ink was even dry on the first contract. And for 7 years, while I thought he was living a selfish life somewhere, he had been out there, carrying the weight of a truth that had destroyed his family. Where is he? I asked, gripping Harper's wrist. Do you know where he is? I don't, Harper said. But he knows where you are. If he reached out to you, if he left you that note, it means he has been waiting for this moment. He knew the exit protocol was coming. She pulled her hand away and shoved the rest of the towels into her basket. "I have to go," she said. "If I stay longer, the cameras outside might tag my license plate. Keep that document. It is a copy, but the notary stamp is visible. It is the thread that pulls the whole sweater apart." She turned to leave, then paused. "Ivy, they think you are weak. They think you are the sick little girl they created. Show them they are wrong." She walked out into the night, leaving me standing under the buzzing lights, clutching a piece of paper that proved my entire life had been a transaction. My parents had sold me, but they had made one critical mistake. They thought they had disposed of a victim. They didn't realize they had just reunited a team. I was still clutching the laundry receipt Harper had given me when my phone vibrated against my thigh. It wasn't a text this time. It was a call. The screen was black, displaying only 2 words: unknown caller. I stared at it. My thumb hovered over the decline button. Harper's warning about tracking was still ringing in my ears, but a gut instinct, a pull I hadn't felt since I was 12 years old, made me slide the icon to the right. "Hello?" I whispered, tucking myself into the shadow of a brick awning just outside the laundromat. "Ivy?" The voice was deep, rough, like gravel grinding together. It didn't sound like the boy who used to read me comic books. It sounded like a man who hadn't slept in a week. "Don't say my name," the voice commanded, sharp and low. "Don't say it anywhere. Not on this line, not in that building, not to yourself." My breath hitched. "It's you. Listen to me," he said. There was no warmth, no "I missed you," no tearful reunion. He sounded like a dispatcher guiding a pilot through a crash landing. "You need to move. You have been standing on that corner for 3 minutes. There's a traffic camera on the pole across the street. Walk north." I started walking, my legs stiff. The anger I had been suppressing, the grief of being abandoned, suddenly boiled over, hotter than the fear. "You left," I hissed into the phone, ignoring his instructions to be quiet. "You walked out the door 7 years ago and never looked back. You let them turn me into a science experiment. And now you call me and order me around?" "I didn't walk out," he said. His voice was flat, terrifyingly calm. "I was erased." "What does that mean?" I demanded, turning the corner onto a darker, quieter street. "Mom said you stole money. Dad said you were on drugs. They said you were dangerous." "Of course they did," he cut in. "That is the narrative. That is how they discredit the witness." There was a pause on the line, filled only by the sound of wind and distant sirens. 7 years ago," he continued, "I came home early from practice. I found Dad at the kitchen table with a man in a gray suit. They were signing papers. Dad told me it was a grant for your medical care. He said we were lucky, but I saw the header on the document. It didn't say grant. It said long-term symptom monitoring and liability waiver." I stopped walking. "Harper told me about the waiver." "She did?" He sounded surprised, but only for a second. "Good. She is one of the few decent ones left. But she doesn't know the half of it. When I asked Dad why he was signing away your right to sue for malpractice, he told me to shut up. When I tried to take a picture of the document, he smashed my phone. That night wasn't an argument. Ivy, it was an eviction. He told me if I stayed, he would call the police and tell them I assaulted him. He gave me 10 minutes to pack." "You could have called," I cried, tears finally spilling over. "You could have tried." "I wrote you a letter every single week for the first year," he said, the crack in his voice betraying the first sign of emotion. "I sent them to the house. I sent them to your school. I tried to call the landline. They changed the number. Then I went to your school to pick you up, just to see you. And the principal called the cops. Dad had filed a restraining order. He told the school I was a violent addict and that if I got near you, I would hurt you. They built a wall around you. Ivy, a wall made of lies and legal paper. I leaned against a wet brick wall, sliding down until I was crouching on the sidewalk. All those years. I thought he hated me. I thought I was the burden that broke the family. But he had been fighting to get back in. Why now? I asked. wiping my face with my sleeve. Why today? Because today is the end game, he said. I have been tracking the accounts. I saw the deposit patterns change 3 months ago. They are cashing out, and when they cash out, they liquidate the assets. You are the asset. Ivy. I met Harper, I said. She told me about the exit protocol. She knows the system, he replied. But I know the players. I haven't just been watching Mom and Dad. I have been watching him. Mr. Collier, I whispered. I have tracked that man through 4 states, Miles said. He isn't just a consultant. He is a cleaner. He finds families with sick kids and greedy parents, and he sets up the structure. He takes 30% off the top. I know where he lives. I know where he keeps his records. And I know he is in town because he is preparing to close the Simmons account permanently. What do I do? I asked. The helplessness was returning. But this time, it felt different. I wasn't asking my parents for permission. I was asking a teammate for a strategy. I can't come to you yet, he said. If I show my face, they will spin it. They will say the unstable brother kidnapped the unstable sister. We need to be smarter. I am sending you a coordinate. My phone buzzed against my ear. A map link popped up. It is not a hotel, he said. It is a small apartment above a tech repair shop in the warehouse district. The owner is a friend. He owes me. The back door code is 4921. Go upstairs. It is safe. And then what? There is a safe in the closet, he said. The combination is your birthday, month, day, year, 4 digits. What is in it? The reason I never really left, he said softly. Go there, Ivy. When you see what is inside, you will understand why I had to live in the shadows. You will find the one thing they are terrified of. The evidence they think they destroyed 7 years ago. The line went dead. No goodbye. Just silence. I stared at the phone for a second, then stood up. My legs were trembling, but not from the sickness. I felt a surge of cold, hard determination. I pulled up the map. It was a 40-minute walk. Deep into the industrial side of the city, I walked fast. I kept my head down, avoiding eye contact, sticking to the shadows just like he said. The city felt different now. It wasn't just a scary place I was lost in. It was a battlefield, and I was moving behind enemy lines. The address led me to a narrow, grime-streaked storefront with a sign that read 0 Point Electronics. The windows were barred, and the closed sign was crooked. I went around to the alleyway in the back. It smelled of old oil and wet cardboard. There was a steel security door. I punched in the code. 4921. The lock buzzed, and the door clicked open. I slipped inside and climbed a steep, narrow staircase that smelled of soldering iron and ozone. At the top was a single wooden door. It was unlocked. I pushed it open. The apartment was barely a living space. It was more like a bunker. The windows were covered with heavy blackout curtains. There was a mattress on the floor, a desk covered in monitors that were currently dark, and walls plastered with maps and timelines. I walked to the closet. It was open. Inside, bolted to the floor, was a heavy, gray fireproof safe. I knelt in front of it. My fingers hovered over the keypad. My birthday. 0312, the mechanism word, and the heavy door popped open with a thud. I reached inside. It wasn't full of cash or guns. There was only one object in the center of the velvet-lined shelf. It was a thick, accordion-style file folder, battered and worn at the edges. As if it had been carried around for years, I pulled it out. My hands were shaking. On the front, written in thick black marker, the same marker used on the note in my bag, was a label that made my breath catch in my throat. Simmons, keep originals. I opened the flap. The first thing I saw was a photograph. It was grainy, taken from a distance, but clear enough. It showed my father, 7 years younger, handing a thick envelope to Mr. Collier in the parking lot of a diner. Behind the photo were papers, not copies. These were originals. The paper felt heavy and textured. I saw the blue ink of wet signatures. I saw the indented impressions from the pen. Miles hadn't just seen the contract that night 7 years ago. He had stolen it. He hadn't been running away to escape them. He had been running to protect this. He had been guarding the smoking gun for a third of his life, waiting for me to be old enough to pull the trigger. I sat cross-legged on the dusty wooden floor of the safe house. The contents of the accordion folder fanned out around me like a morbid tarot spread. The adrenaline that had carried me across the city was gone, replaced by a cold, clinical horror. I wasn't looking at medical records. I was looking at a business plan. There were bank statements from a Cayman Islands account, routing numbers for shell companies, and worst of all, performance reviews. But they weren't reviewing employees. They were reviewing patients. My phone buzzed. It was a text from the unknown number again, followed immediately by a call. "You opened it," Miles said. He didn't ask. He knew. "I am looking at a spreadsheet," I said, my voice trembling. "It lists people, subject A, subject B. It goes all the way down to subject K." "Look for yourself," Miles instructed. "You are subject Y, S." I ran my finger down the column. There I was, subject Y, next to my code, under a column titled Status. It didn't say recovering or critical. It read, Anomaly, Prolonged Stability. Prolonged stability, I read aloud, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. What does that mean? Why is stability an anomaly? Because the model relies on volatility, Miles explained, his voice tinny through the speaker. "I figured this out 3 years ago when I hacked their email server. They don't make money when you are healthy, Ivy, but they don't make money if you die. Either, if you die, the study ends and the grant stops. If you get better, the study ends. They need you in the gray zone, sick enough to generate data, but alive enough to keep the checks clearing." I felt bile rise in my throat. They wanted me sick? "They wanted you managed," he corrected. "Think about it. Every time you had a good month where the tremors stopped, what happened?" I closed my eyes, memories flashing back. The summer I turned 17, I had felt great for 3 weeks. I started painting again. I even thought about applying for a part-time job. Then, suddenly, my dosage was adjusted. My father said the doctor wanted to be proactive. 2 days later, I was bedridden with migraines so severe I couldn't open my eyes. "They changed my meds," I whispered. "Look at the document dated October 12th, 2019, Miles said. "It is a change order form." I shuffled through the papers until I found it. It was a standard-looking medical form, the kind used to authorize a prescription switch. Request to substitute compound A with placebo B for observation of withdrawal baseline. It wasn't a treatment, it was a torture test. They had taken me off my real medicine and replaced it with sugar pills just to see how fast I would crash. But it wasn't the medical jargon that made my heart stop. It was the signature at the bottom. Usually, these forms require a physician's signature. This one had a line for authorized guardian proxy. There was a single initial scrawled there, a looping, elegant letter C. I stared at it until my vision blurred. I knew that C. I had seen it on birthday cards. I had seen it on permission slips for field trips I was never allowed to go on. I had seen it on the grocery list's magnet clipped to the fridge. "Mom," I choked out. My mother's name was Catherine, but she never went by it. She was just Mom. But that C, with the little flourish at the top, was hers. It wasn't forged. It was distinct. It was personal. "She signed it," I said, the realization shattering whatever small piece of hope I had left. "Dad." I expected Dad. He was always the numbers guy. He was always cold. But Mom? She held my hair back when I vomited. She cried with me when I missed prom. "She cried," Miles said, his voice hard. "And then she signed the paper that caused the vomiting." "No," I insisted, shaking my head even though he couldn't see me. Maybe she didn't know what she was signing. Maybe Dad bullied her. You know how he is. He dominates everything. "Ivy, stop," Miles said. "You are doing what victims do. You are bargaining. You are trying to find a way to keep loving the person who hurt you. She is my mother. Miles, she is your mother too. She is an accomplice, he snapped, and I can prove it. How? Dig deeper in the folder, he said. There is a small envelope taped to the back of the ledger. Inside is a USB drive. It is labeled Kitchen Audio. I turned the heavy folder over. There it was. A silver flash drive, small and unassuming. What is this? I asked, prying it loose. I told you I have been watching them, Miles said. 2 years ago, I managed to slip a listening device into the house disguised as a carbon monoxide detector. It only lasted 3 weeks before the battery died, but I got what I needed. I held the cold metal drive in my palm. I don't know if I can do this, I whispered. If I listen to this, and it is what you say it is, there is no going back. I can never pretend it was a mistake. They didn't make a mistake when they put your bag on the porch, Miles said. They made a choice. Now you have to make one. Do you want to be their daughter, or do you want to be free? I hung up the phone. The silence in the safe house was deafening. I opened Sarah's old laptop again, the fan whirred to life, sounding like a chainsaw in the quiet room. I plugged in the USB drive. A single audio file appeared on the screen. kitchen_audio_NOV_2019.w AV. My hand hovered over the trackpad. November 2019. That was the month I was hospitalized for severe dehydration and hallucinations. I remembered that month. I remembered my mother sitting by my bedside, knitting, telling the nurses how brave I was. I clicked play. At first, there was just static, then the familiar hum of our refrigerator, then the sound of silverware clinking against china. The deposit cleared. My father's voice cut through the static. He sounded relaxed. I could hear the rustle of a newspaper. Is it the full amount? That was my mother. Her voice was clear. She wasn't crying. She sounded practical. Minus the consulting fee for Collier, my father replied. It is enough to cover the mortgage on the rental property and the lease on the new SUV. Good, my mother said. Then there was a pause. I am worried about Ivy, though she looks terrible. The new protocol is very aggressive. My heart leaped. See, I thought, she is worried. It has to be aggressive, my father said. Collier said the data was plateauing. If we don't show a significant variance this quarter, we drop to the lower tier of funding. I know, my mother sighed. I heard the sound of a chair scraping back. It is just she was screaming last night. The hallucinations are frightening her. It is temporary, Catherine, my father said dismissively. Once the review period is over, we can stabilize her again. Just stick to the script. If she asks, tell her it is a side effect of the virus she caught. There was a long silence on the recording. I held my breath, waiting for her to argue, waiting for her to say no. This is too much. We have to stop. Okay, my mother said finally. Her voice was steady. But we need to make sure she doesn't talk to Mrs. Higgins next door. She was asking questions about why the ambulance comes so often. I will handle Higgins, my father said. You just make sure Ivy takes the PM dose. Watch her swallow it. Last time she hid it under her tongue. I will crush it into her applesauce, my mother said. She never notices. The recording ended. I sat there, staring at the black screen. The world didn't spin. It didn't blur. It just stopped. I will crush it into her applesauce. She knew. She wasn't being bullied. She wasn't a passive victim of my father's greed. She was the enforcer. She was the one who smoothed my hair and fed me poison with a spoon. Also, they could pay the lease on a new car. I closed the laptop. I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It wasn't pain. It was the heavy, iron door of my childhood finally slamming shut. I wasn't Ivy the sick girl anymore. I was Ivy the witness, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of the truth. I was weaponizing it. The silence in the safe house felt heavy, like the air before a tornado touches down. I had just heard my mother admit to drugging me, but the folder on the floor contained one more digital file. It was labeled simply, kitchen_meeting_Collier_deck_2022.wave. December. That was only 2 months ago. That was right before the exit protocol began. I clicked play. The audio quality was sharper this time, likely recorded from a different device Miles had planted closer to the table. I heard the distinct sound of a briefcase snapping open. "We are running out of runway," Alan, a smooth, unfamiliar voice said. That had to be Mr. Collier. "The Oversight Committee is flagging accounts that have been dormant for too long. Ivy has been stable for 3 quarters. Stability does not generate revenue, it generates questions." "We followed the instructions," my father's voice replied. He sounded tight, stressed. "We reported the behavioral outbursts. We kept her isolated. Everyone thinks she is unstable." "The narrative is fine," Collier interrupted, his tone bored. "The problem is the biology. If she appears healthy to an independent auditor, the grant is revoked. And if the grant is revoked, the retroactive audit begins. Do you understand what that means?" "We can't pay it back," my father whispered. The desperation in his voice was raw. "You know we can't. The money from the first 2 years is gone. We used it to cover the bad transaction from the housing crash. If they look at our personal accounts..." I froze. My hand flew to my mouth. It wasn't just about the grant money, it was about debt. My parents weren't just using me to get rich. They were using me to plug a hole in a sinking ship. They had committed financial fraud years ago, and Collier, or the people he worked for, had bailed them out. I wasn't just a source of income, I was their blackmail payment. "That is exactly my point," Collier said. "If Ivy talks to an investigator with a clear head, if she tells a story that contradicts the medical logs, the support stops. And then the legal team comes for the house, the cars, and the shell company." "But she is my child." My mother's voice cut in. It was weak, trembling. "We can't just throw her out. She doesn't know how to survive on her own. She is sick. Mr. Collier, maybe not as sick as the papers say, but she needs help." "Catherine," Collier said. His voice dropped an octave. It was chillingly devoid of empathy. "Do you want to be a mother, or do you want to stay out of federal prison? You have a choice. You can have feelings, or you can have a future. You cannot have both." There was a long, agonizing silence. I could hear a clock ticking in the background of the recording. "When she turns 19 next month," my father said, his voice flat and resolved. "We will end it. We will trigger the non-compliance clause. We will put her out. And then?" Collier asked. "And then we move states," my father said. "We close the file. We claim she ran away to join a cult or something. We disappear before the audit hits." The recording clicked off. I sat there, the tears finally spilling over, hot and fast. I wasn't crying because I was sad. I was crying because the sheer scale of the betrayal was too big to fit inside my chest. They weren't just bad parents. They were cornered rats. They had been drowning in debt since I was a child, and they had used my body as a life raft. And now that the raft was getting too heavy, they were cutting the rope. "They were going to move," I whispered to the empty room. "They were going to leave me here and just vanish." I wiped my face with the back of my hand. I stood up and walked to the small kitchenette in the corner of the apartment. I drank a glass of tap water, forcing myself to swallow past the lump in my throat. "Hurt later." I told myself, "Work now." I went back to the papers. I grabbed a stack of sticky notes from the desk and started building a timeline on the wall. 2014. First symptoms appear. First large deposit into Simmons family support. 2016. Dad buys the lake house. My medication is switched to a heavy sedative. 2019. The bad transaction is mentioned in emails. My dosage doubles. 2022. Collier visits. The exit protocol is discussed. It was a map of my pain, overlaid with a map of their greed. Every time I got worse, they got richer. Every time I tried to get better, they pushed me back down. My phone buzzed. It was Miles. You heard it, he said. Yeah, I said, my voice steady. I heard it. They are broke. Or they were. They used me to pay off a debt. And now they are panicked, Miles said. I am monitoring the police scanner and the local news feeds. You need to see this. He sent a link to a secure browser he had installed on the laptop. Don't use your own accounts, he warned. Just look. I clicked the link. It opened a page for our town's local community news group. The top post had 5,000 shares. It was a picture of me, a photo from my junior prom, where I looked pale and fragile, smiling weakly at the camera. The headline read, "Missing and Endangered. Family pleads for help." I read the text below, my stomach churning. Our beloved daughter, Ivy Simmons, has suffered a severe mental health crisis and left home without her life-saving medication. She is 19 years old but functions at a much younger level due to her condition. She is prone to delusions and may tell strangers she is being persecuted or abused. This is a symptom of her illness. Please, if you see her, do not approach her alone. Call the number below or the police immediately. We just want our baby home. They are gaslighting the whole city, I whispered. They are vaccinating the jury, Miles corrected. They are planting the seed that anything you say is a lie before you even open your mouth. If you walk into a police station right now, the cops won't see a victim. They will see a delusional girl off her meds. They thought of everything, I said. Looking at the comments section, hundreds of people were sending prayers. Mrs. Higgins next door had commented, "I saw her screaming at her poor father just last night. Such a tragedy." They didn't think of one thing, Miles said. What? They didn't think you would find the originals, Miles said. And they didn't think you would have a lawyer. I don't have a lawyer. Miles, I have $40 and a bus pass. You don't, Miles said. But I do. And she is waiting for us. Pack the files. Ivy, we are going on the offensive. I looked at the timeline on the wall one last time. I ripped the sticky note that said, 2023. Ivy leaves off the wall and crumbled it in my fist. I am not running away, I said to the empty room. I am building a case. The glow of the laptop screen felt like an interrogation light. I stared at the comments section of the missing person post my parents had manufactured. Strangers were dissecting my psyche, offering prayers for a girl they thought was broken. If I ran now, if I took the bus to another state and tried to disappear, I would only prove them right. A runaway is unstable, a fugitive is guilty, but a victim who stands in the center of the room and points a finger? That is a problem they cannot manage. I am not going to hide, I said, turning away from the screen to face the empty room where Miles's voice had been coming from the speakerphone. If they want a public spectacle, let's give them one, but I am writing the script this time. Good, Miles said, because I have someone who specializes in rewrites. An hour later, a heavy knock rattled the reinforced door of the apartment. I froze, but my phone buzzed with a text from Miles. Open it. It is Morgan. I pulled back the bolts. Standing in the hallway wasn't a tactical team or a police officer, but a woman who looked like she was made of sharp angles. She wore a tailored suit that had seen better days and carried a briefcase that looked heavy enough to be a weapon. She didn't smile. She just looked me up and down, assessing the damage. You look like hell, she said. I am Morgan Slate. Miles says you are ready to burn the house down. Can I come in? I stepped aside. Morgan didn't waste time with pleasantries. She swept the papers off the small table, sat down, and pulled out a fresh legal pad. Here is the situation, Morgan said, uncapping a pen. Your parents have filed an emergency petition for conservatorship. They are claiming you are experiencing a psychotic break. If the judge grants it, you lose the right to hire a lawyer, manage your money, or even choose where you sleep. They become your legal brain. They can do that? I asked, feeling the cold seep into my bones. Without me being there? They can if they convince the court you are a danger to yourself, Morgan replied. And right now, with that viral post and your medical history of instability, They have a strong case. We have 48 hours before the temporary order becomes permanent. So how do we stop it? We don't just stop it, Morgan said, her eyes flashing. We invert it. We need to do two things simultaneously. First, we file for an emergency protective order, not because they hit you, but because they are using the legal system to harass you. Second, we need to prove you are competent. If you are competent, their entire narrative collapses. She slid a document across the table. It wasn't a medical form, it was a power of attorney. Sign this, she commanded. This designates me as your legal representative. It revokes any previous authorizations you might have signed under duress or while medicated. The moment you sign this, their access to your records becomes illegal. I picked up the pen. My hand trembled, but not from the sickness. For 5 years, I had signed papers without reading them because I was told it was for my own good. This was the first time I was signing something that I understood. I pressed the pen to the paper and wrote Ivy Simmons in clear, defiant cursive. Done, I said. Good, Morgan said, tucking the paper away. Now, we need the smoking gun. Miles said you have the originals. I have the contract, I said, pointing to the safe. And the audio? That helps, Morgan said. But we need a bridge. We need someone who can connect the money to the medical fraud. The door opened again. I jumped, but it was just Harper. She slipped inside, shaking rain off her hoodie. She looked exhausted, but she was holding a tablet like a shield. I have the logs, Harper said without preamble. She placed the tablet in front of Morgan. I pulled the metadata from the Simmons family support account before I revoked my own access. It proves the funds aren't donations. They are direct transfers from Ethelgard Research Group. Morgan scanned the screen. This is perfect. It shows a clear transactional relationship. They weren't treating a patient. They were servicing a client, and the client was the research firm. I can testify to the structure, Harper said, looking at me. I can explain to a judge that your medical file doesn't exist in any hospital database. It is stored on a corporate server alongside patent applications. You were never a patient, Ivy. You were proprietary technology. I felt sick, but the anger was hotter. So we go to the police? No, a voice said from the doorway. I spun around. Standing there, dripping wet, was a man I hadn't seen in 7 years. He was taller, broader, and had a scar running through his left eyebrow that hadn't been there when he was 17. But the eyes were the same, intense, watchful. Miles, I breathed. He didn't hug me. He walked over and placed a hand on my shoulder. A solid, grounding weight. The police will bury this. Collier has friends in the precinct. Half the town thinks Dad is a saint. If we go to the cops, they will hand you back to him for your own safety while they investigate. We need a venue they can't control. Where were you? I asked, grabbing his sleeve. You sounded like a spy on the phone. I wasn't a spy, Miles said, looking at the map on the wall. I was an auditor. Sort of. After I left, I met a group in Chicago. They help people like us. People whose lives have been edited by corporations. I spent 6 years learning how to break into encrypted servers and track shell companies. I didn't disappear because I wanted to. Ivy, I disappeared so I could learn how to kill the monster. He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw the brother who used to teach me how to breathe. I am sorry I took so long, he said softly. You are here now. I said, so what is the plan? Tomorrow night, Miles said, pointing to a flyer on the desk. The County Board of Supervisors meeting. It is open to the public. It is live streamed on the county website and archived. There is a public comment section. A town council meeting? I asked, confused. That is for zoning disputes and potholes. Exactly, Morgan said, catching on. It is boring, it is bureaucratic, and it is the one place Collier won't have security. If we walk in there and put this evidence on the public record, read it into the minutes, it becomes a government document. They can't seal it. They can't gag order it, and the press will be there. We ambush them with the truth, Harper added. Live on camera. It is dangerous, Miles warned. Once we step into that room, there is no going back. Collier will know we are coming. He might try to stop us before we get to the microphone. Let him try, I said. The rest of the night was a blur of preparation. Morgan coached me on what to say. State your name. State your age. Do not get emotional. Read the timeline. Harper organized the financial logs into a clear, undeniable packet. Miles sat by the window, watching the street. Around 3 a.m, my phone buzzed. It was a text message. The number was blocked. I picked it up. The screen glowed in the dim light. If you appear tomorrow, you will lose everything. The house, the money, the reputation. You will be nothing. I stared at the words. They thought I was still playing their game. They thought I cared about the house that was a prison, or the money that was blood money, or the reputation that was built on a lie. I typed my reply with steady fingers. I have lost enough already. I hit send. Then I turned off the phone and threw it into the trash can. I didn't need it anymore. I had my voice back. The morning of the hearing was gray and sharp, the kind of weather that made old fractures ache. I wore a blazer Morgan had lent me, which was a size too big in the shoulders, and dark jeans. I felt less like a plaintiff and more like a child playing dress-up. But as we approached the granite steps of the county administration building, I straightened my spine. Miles was walking a few paces behind me, scanning the perimeter, while Morgan walked beside me, clutching the thick file of evidence like a shield. We were 3 steps from the glass doors when a man in a navy blue windbreaker stepped directly into my path. He was not a police officer. He held a clipboard and wore a laminated badge that read, Community Crisis Response. 2 other men, larger and dressed in similar nondescript clothing, flanked him. Ivy Simmons? He asked. It was not a question. Who are you? I asked, stopping short. I am acting on an emergency medical hold authorization, he said, his voice practiced and calm, designed to de-escalate a situation that wasn't escalating. Your parents have filed a petition stating you are in the midst of a severe manic episode and pose a flight risk. We are here to transport you to a secure assessment facility. My pulse thudded in my throat. This was it, the ambush. They weren't trying to win in court. They were trying to prevent me from ever walking into the room. She is not going anywhere, Morgan said. Stepping between us, her voice was like a whip crack. Ma'am, this is a medical matter, the man said, reaching for my arm. We have a signed affidavit from her primary caregivers declaring her incompetent. He held up a paper. I saw the signature at the bottom. It was my father's handwriting, jagged and aggressive. Touch her, and I will have you arrested for kidnapping, Morgan said, shoving a document of her own into the man's chest. This is a temporary protective order granted by Judge Holloway at 8 this morning. It supersedes any guardianship claims pending a competency hearing. And this, she pointed to a second paper, is a notarized declaration of independent counsel. Ivy Simmons has legal representation. You cannot speak to her without me present. The man hesitated. He looked at the paper, then back at the 2 men behind him. A small crowd of people entering the building had stopped to watch. Phones were coming out. The order is time-stamped, Morgan pressed, her finger tapping the header. 8:15. Your affidavit is dated yesterday. We win on the timeline. Now get out of my way. The man lowered his clipboard. He glared at Morgan, then looked at me with cold, professional indifference. We will be waiting inside, he signaled his team, and they stepped aside. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. My hands were shaking again, the tremors radiating from my core. Good job, Miles murmured as he passed me. Keep moving. The hearing room was cavernous, smelling of lemon polish and stale coffee. The board of supervisors sat on a raised dais, looking bored and impatient. But the gallery was full. I saw reporters from the local paper. I saw neighbors. And in the front row, I saw them. My mother was wearing a pale blue cardigan, clutching a tissue. Her eyes were red-rimmed. My father sat next to her, staring straight ahead, his jaw set like concrete. When I walked in, My mother let out a small, strangled sob that echoed in the quiet room. "Oh, Ivy," she wailed softly, just loud enough for the microphone near the podium to pick up. "Please, just come home. You are not well." The room turned to look at me. I felt the weight of their judgment. To them, I was the sick girl who had run away. I was the tragedy. My mother's performance was flawless. She wasn't angry. She was terrified for me. It was a weaponized form of love that made me want to scream. I faltered. My foot caught on the carpet. For a split second, the old narrative took over. Maybe I am sick. Maybe I'm imagining the conspiracy. Maybe I should just go sit with them. Then I felt a hand on the small of my back. It was warm and heavy. "Breathe," Miles whispered. "In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4, just like when you were 8. I inhaled sharply. The smell of rain and cheap coffee grounded me. I looked at Miles. He wasn't looking at our parents. He was looking at me, his eyes clear and steady. He nodded once toward the podium. I walked past my parents. I didn't look at them. I walked straight to the microphone stand in the center of the aisle. "State your name for the record," the chairman said, looking over his glasses. "Ivy Simmons," I said. My voice wavered, then strengthened. "And I am not here to ask for help. I am here to submit evidence regarding the misuse of county health funds." A murmur went through the room. My father stiffened. "Miss Simmons," the chairman said, "this is a public comment period. If this is a family dispute—" "It is not a dispute," I interrupted. I opened the folder Morgan had handed me. "It is a ledger." I didn't tell them how I felt. I didn't talk about the betrayal or the fear. I did exactly what Miles and Morgan had told me to do. I became a machine of facts. On November 12, 2019, I read, "A transfer of $12,000 was made from the Simmons Family Support Trust to a personal account held by my father. The memo line read, 'Reimbursement for medical travel.' On that date, I was confined to my bed. There was no travel." My mother stopped crying. She stared at me, her face draining of color. "On February 3rd, 2020, I continued, flipping the page, "a payment of $8,000 was made to Collier Consulting. 2 days later, my dosage of anticonvulsant medication was doubled. Despite my blood work showing normal levels, the doctor who signed the order does not exist in the state medical registry." "Objection!" A man in a suit stood up from the bench behind my parents. It was their lawyer. "Mr. Chairman, this is highly sensitive medical information regarding a minor's psychiatric history. It is protected under privacy laws." "I am 19, I said into the microphone, my voice ringing out. "I am an adult, and I am waiving my privacy because the privacy was never for me. It was for them." I pulled the USB drive from my pocket. "I have audio recordings," I said. "Conversations between my parents and a man named Alan Collier. In these recordings, they discuss the exit protocol. They discuss how to stage my breakdown so they can close the account before an audit reveals they have spent the grant money on personal debts." The room went dead silent. The reporters were typing furiously. My father stood up, his face purple. "She is lying," he shouted. "She is off her medication. She is hallucinating conspiracy theories." "Then explain the money," I shouted back, turning to face him. "Explain why the trust paid off your mortgage the same week I was hospitalized for an overdose you administered." The chairman banged his gavel. "Order! Order in the chamber!" My father sat down, breathing heavily. My mother looked like she was going to faint. "Mr. Chairman," their lawyer said, his voice smooth and dangerous, "we request that these records be sealed immediately, regardless of Ms. Simmons' claims. Presenting unauthorized audio recordings of private medical discussions is a violation of state wiretapping laws and HIPAA regulations. This is a private family tragedy, not a public matter." I looked at the lawyer, then I looked at the chairman, who was holding the USB drive I had placed on the dais. "If this is a medical matter," I asked, my voice cutting through the tension like a knife, "then why does it come with a price tag? Why is my health tied to a bank account in the Cayman Islands? If they were just caring for a sick daughter, why did they need to threaten me to keep quiet? The chairman looked at the drive, then at my parents, and finally at me. He didn't hand it back. "The board acknowledges receipt of these materials," the chairman said formally. "Given the serious nature of the allegations regarding public fund misuse, we are not sealing them. We are transferring them immediately to the district attorney's office for review." "No!" my mother screamed. It was a real scream this time. "Next item," the chairman said. Banging the gavel again, I stepped back from the microphone. My knees felt like water. Miles was there instantly, guiding me back toward the exit. The reporters were shouting questions, but I didn't hear them. I had done it. I had ripped the curtain down, but as we pushed through the doors back into the cold morning air, I saw my father arguing with their lawyer. He looked up and locked eyes with me through the glass. He didn't look defeated. He looked cornered, and a cornered animal is the most dangerous thing in the world. "It is not over," Miles said, following my gaze. "I know," I replied, "but they can't hide in the dark anymore." We walked down the steps, not as a victim and a runaway, but as a team. The first battle was won, but the war was about to get much, much uglier. The adrenaline from the hearing had faded, leaving a hollow, aching silence in the safe house. The streetlights outside cast long, distorted shadows against the maps on the wall. Miles sat on the floor near the open safe, holding a single, thick envelope. It was sealed with red wax, old and brittle. He had not shown me this one before. "You need to see the rest of it," Miles said. His voice was quiet. "The grants, the medical fraud, the fake doctors, that was just the overhead. That was just how they paid the bills while they waited for the payday." He slid the envelope across the floorboards. I picked it up. The wax crumbled under my thumb. Inside was a set of heavy, cream-colored documents bound in blue legal backing. The title page read, "The Last Will and Testament of Eleanor Vance." "Grandma," I whispered. "She had died when I was 14, right before the symptoms started." I turned the page. It was dense legalese, but Miles reached over and pointed to a paragraph on page 4. "I hereby bequeath the entirety of my estate, including the property on Highland Avenue and the investment portfolio, to my granddaughter, Ivy Simmons, to be held in trust until her 21st birthday." I frowned. "But Dad said Grandma died broke. He said she lost everything in the crash." "Keep reading," Miles said. I read the next line. "Provided that, upon her 21st birthday, she is not under legal guardianship and has not been declared mentally incompetent by a court of law. In the event of incapacitation, control of the trust shall revert to her legal guardians." The air left my lungs. "It wasn't about the grant money," I said, my voice barely audible. "The $5,000 a month from the research group that was peanuts?" "That was just to keep the lights on," Miles confirmed. "The real prize is the inheritance. Grandma didn't lose her money, Ivy. She left it all to you. But Dad couldn't touch a cent of it unless you were unfit. They didn't kick you out because you were expensive. They kicked you out because you are turning 20 soon. They had 1 year left to solidify the paper trail that proves you are too crazy to manage $2 million. I sat back against the wall, the room spinning. It made perfect, 6 cents. The sudden escalation in treatments. The desperate attempt to get me on a medical hold this morning. The way they isolated me from everyone. They weren't hiding a sick daughter. They were building a case against an heir. They needed me broken, I realized. If I am healthy, I get the money. If I am sick, they get the money. And Mr. Collier, Miles said, pulling up a new image on the laptop screen, is not a medical consultant. I ran his background 3 ways. He is an asset recovery specialist. He finds families with complex wills and helps them navigate the loopholes. He takes 20% of the recovered estate. He is a bounty hunter, I said, looking at the man's smug face on the screen. For inheritances, I took the liberty, Miles said, a grim smile touching his lips. of visiting the county clerk's archive 6 months ago. The document you are holding is a copy, but the one in the safe? He tapped the metal box. That is the original certified copy I stole from Dad's study before I left. I deposited the true original with a blind trust in Chicago. Even if they burned the house down today, they can't destroy the will. The next morning, we didn't go back to the courthouse. We went to Morgan Slate's office. Morgan was on the phone when we walked in, her face pale with intensity. She slammed the receiver down and looked at us. "You were right," she said. "I just got off the phone with the bank. There was an attempted transfer of the entire trust balance at 9 this morning. Your father tried to use the emergency affidavit from yesterday to claim authorized access. Did it go through?" I asked. "No," Morgan said, sliding a piece of paper across her desk. "Because at 8:30 this morning, I filed a motion for emergency injunctive relief based on fraud. I attached the audio recording of Collier. I attached the will, and I attached a sworn statement from Harper Lane regarding the fake medical data." She leaned back in her chair. "The judge didn't just freeze the trust, Ivy. He froze everything. Your parents' personal accounts, the Simmons Family Support Fund, and Collier's consulting fees. It is all locked down pending a federal investigation." "Federal?" Miles asked. "Wire fraud?" Morgan said. "Crossing state lines to facilitate a guardianship scam is a federal offense. The FBI is already asking for copies of the tapes." 2 hours later, my mother asked for a meeting. She came to the office alone. She looked smaller than I remembered, her expensive coat hanging loosely on her frame. She didn't look like the monster who had signed the permission slips. She looked like a woman who had been running a marathon for 10 years and had finally collapsed. She sat on the other side of the conference table. Miles stood by the door, his arms crossed. I sat next to Morgan. "Ivy," she started. Reaching a hand across the mahogany surface, I didn't reach back. "Why?" I asked. One word. "We were going to lose the house," she whispered. Tears leaked from her eyes, but they didn't move me anymore. "After the business failed. Your father, he was so desperate. And then your grandmother died. And she left it all to you. It felt like a punishment. We were drowning. And you were a child, sitting on a life raft made of gold. So you drowned me instead," I said. "It started small," she sobbed. "Just a few doctor's notes to delay the probate. But then Collier showed up. He said it was standard. He said it was just paperwork. He promised you wouldn't be hurt." "You crushed pills into my applesauce," I said, my voice flat. "You signed orders to put me on drugs that made me hallucinate. You watched me shake until I couldn't walk. That wasn't paperwork. Mom, that was torture." "I was scared," she cried. "I was scared of being poor. I was scared of him." "You should have been scared of me," I said, standing up. "You should have been scared of the day I woke up." I turned to Morgan. "I don't want to hear anymore. Do what you have to do." I walked out of the room. I heard my mother call my name, a desperate, wailing sound, but I didn't turn around. I walked out into the lobby where Miles was waiting. The fallout was swift and brutal. With the evidence we provided, the state medical board launched an immediate inquiry into the clinics that had taken Collier's bribes. The local news, hungry for a scandal to replace the missing girl story, turned on my parents with vicious speed. The headline changed from distraught family searches for daughter to guardianship horror. Parents accused of multi-million-dollar trust fraud. My father was arrested 3 days later at the bank, trying to access a safety deposit box that had already been flagged by the FBI. Mr. Collier vanished, but Miles said the feds had tracked his passport to a flight that never took off. He was picked up in an airport lounge in Miami. The court hearing to dismiss the guardianship lasted 10 minutes. The judge looked at the will, looked at the medical logs Harper had provided, and looked at me. "Case dismissed with prejudice," he ruled. "Ms. Simmons is a competent adult. The petition is denied. The assets are released to her sole control." It was over. I stood on the steps of the courthouse one last time. The sun was actually shining. It was cold, but it was a clean cold, not the damp misery of that first night. Miles stood beside me, lighting a cigarette he didn't smoke. "So," he said, looking out at the city, "you are a millionaire, and you are homeless." "I am buying Sarah's apartment building," I said, "and I am evicting the rats." He laughed. It was a real laugh, sound and deep. "I still have the tremors," I said, looking at my hand. It was shaking slightly. "The doctor said the damage from the sedatives might be permanent. I am not going to be magically healthy." "Miles, you are not," he agreed. "But you are not a prisoner." "I used to think I was a burden," I said quietly. "That is what they always told me, that I was heavy, that I dragged them down." Miles threw the unlit cigarette into the trash. He turned to me, his face serious. "You are not a burden, Ivy," he said. I looked at him, and for the first time in my life, I believed the reflection in his eyes. "I know," I said. "I never was. I was just something they couldn't control anymore." We walked down the steps together, leaving the shadow of the courthouse behind us. I didn't know where we were going for dinner, or what I would do with the rest of my life, but for the first time in 19 years, the direction was entirely up to me. Thank you so much for listening to Ivy's story of survival and justice. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. So please drop your location in the comments below, and let's share our thoughts on this family's secrets. Don't forget to subscribe to the Familyrevenge channel, like this video, and smash that hype button to help this story reach even more people who need to hear it.